We are going to have a conversation today with Chase and Shelby, who are going to help us understand what's happening in trans rights right now.
So my name is Shelby Chestnut. I use they and he pronouns, and I'm the executive director of the Transgender Law Center.
Hi everyone. So good to see you both and be here. I'm Chase Strangio. I am the co-director of the LGBT and HIV project at the National Office of the ACLU. And I use he and they them pronouns as well.
This is a series of conversations I've been doing called Election Time with AMB, which emerged from my sense of panic about this election and like how to navigate it, what to do. And was like, let me slow down and just ask some people who are experts in different areas of the work to come and talk with me. This is, I think, like the 9th conversation or something. They've been really beautiful. I'm so grateful that y'all came on to talk with me today, made space for this. I know you're working, both of you, just intensely and nonstop. And I also think it's really important that people hear what you're working on and how it's moving in this moment. I think first I would just start by asking each of you, and like I'll share how we are right now.
It's like existential crisis after crisis, and also just amazement that we're still here in some ways. I feel like we're living in a moment of extreme crisis every direction you take, and every morning I'm waking up a little bit heartbroken. But for me, it's driving me, I think, to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm scared about where we're at.
I've been thinking a lot about trying to ground myself in each day because I watch myself get very numb and compartmentalized. And have been doing the same type of work for about 25 years. And in the last 10 years, I've basically spent every day reading something about how I, as a person and the people I care about are bad in some way, in like the most, sort of what, within that umbrella. And I can see how that's really hardened me and compartmentalized me. And then you compound on top of that sort of the nonstop violence that we're witnessing in both our immediate lives and through our access to imagery around the world. And I can see how it's just making me not as connected to the world as I want to be. So one thing I've just been trying to do is start every day with, sort of some amount of physical connectedness to things that I care about, whether it's like my cat or my child. And that feels very grounding. So I had a nice cuddle with the cat morning. And that helped.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I resonate with both of you that there's a presence of fear and dread. There's a presence of overwhelm. There's a presence of like numbness and being able to see the numbness and trying to navigate. Like, I don't want to stay in that numbness. I want to stay in the aliveness, and the aliveness hurts. And so I want to go numb. And so I do find myself continuously looking for, okay, but where are the small openings? That's always I'm like, small, there's something small that is also miraculous happening right now. Or there's something huge, but it's made up of a lot of small parts of a lot of individuals, of people getting to make choices and decisions. And this series of conversations has actually been very fortifying for me because it has allowed me to, prism, right? Like I'm like, oh, I need to understand what's happening from as many angles as possible. I'm a Virgo, I'm like, I need to like be thorough and then from that thoroughness, really center in love. And each of these conversations has been love, like a lot of love um, and lovingly being humble about where we are right now, right? Like love sometimes has to be very honest and be like, we're not where we want to be. We're not where we thought we should be. It feels like we're getting dragged backwards. It feels like we're getting torn apart. And we have beloveds who are being torn apart, and we have beloveds who are being dragged backwards, and just trying to be with the reality. So I get overwhelmed every day. I cry every day. I cried this morning in the bathtub. And then I get up and I try to channel that into my work. Like, okay, so then what are we going to do? Um, the question I've been starting out these conversations with is rooted in the work of Grace Lee Boggs. And she would always ask it to us when we visited her, which is, what time is it on the clock of the world? And I've had a lot of people answer this in a lot of different ways. I would love to hear specifically in the world of trans rights, in the world of trans bodily autonomy, what time is it on the clock of the world?
I think Chase should go because he's going to the Supreme Court and
Yeah,
he's going to be arguing a case before the Supreme Court.
yeah.
Well, so I will say like something about my transness um has always felt like it had a different relationship with time. And this sense that when we think about time, and not necessarily in the clock sense, which has a sort of universality to it, but the linearity of time that's often imposed on us. What I love about transness is that I feel like we aren't living and we are expanding like we're not living in a linear time, and we're the promise of a more disruptive notion of time. And so as I
Mhm.
think what I see us being confronted with right now with respect to trans people in the United States in particular in this political moment is the threat of freedom in a particular construct that transness represents. The lack of order that is positioned from traditional structures of power within a trans narrative of being. And so we're at this moment, almost like sort of some tension moment in the clock where the promise of something different is causing a very significant reaction. But there's also this hugely liberatory potential. And I think what we can see now is this fear that trans people represent, this idea that you could live outside something as centrally organizing as the sex binary, and what that then represents for everything else. That if we can destabilize that, what else can we destabilize? And that the more people are confronted with the fear of that opportunity within themselves, the more they try to shut it down, both on an individual and a structural level. And so we're at this moment, like almost before the clock is smashed, but also people are desperately trying to hold on to some version of linear time that they've organized their life around. Yeah, so I'll stop there. Those are just some initial thoughts, but I'm curious what Shelby has to say.
Yeah. I kind of feel like it's like you've been studying for the test for like 10 years and then you didn't set your alarm right and you're waking up and have to be somewhere to take the test in like the next 5 minutes sort of vibe. But it
Mm.
like as terrifying I think as the political landscape is really globally with Christian nationalism and the attack on trans rights and just bodily autonomy broadly, like you also see just so much brilliance and drive and what young people are bringing to the conversation, both as it relates to gender, but just organizing as a whole. Like I feel like a major resurgence of things I haven't felt in 20 plus years. And
Uh-huh.
it's like honestly giving me life. Like I feel more energized now than I did 2 years ago, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
But I think we have to understand that there are states, there are going to be more states that will make it so we can't have healthcare, who make it so kids aren't safe to be in schools, whose parents will be investigated because they're caring for their child who's
Mhm.
trans. Like all of these things, they're happening, but
Yeah.
we're also winning at the same time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And it's one of, I keep thinking about this with abortion, with trans rights, with queer rights, with so many things that it's like there's not a going back, but you can make things so much more dangerous, right? Like once you have tasted your rights, once you've tasted freedom, once you've tasted living into your identity, once you've tasted making your choices about your body the way you're supposed to, like we have enough of that in our bones now that it's like, oh, we actually know we're supposed to be able to have this right. But the people who are making decisions can really put us in danger, right? they can make it harder and harder and harder for us to exist. We don't disappear. You don't disappear, but they can make it so dangerous. And it feels like that we're on this precipice where it's like, oh, like things are bad. They could get more dangerous for people who are not going to be boxed back in or denied themselves. And so I really appreciate that framing of like this moment. And there's a question that Octavia Butler, I feel like, was asking in all of her science fiction work. She was trying to inform us. You know, she was like, I need you to know that this is what's actually real. This is what's actually happening. Even if it's not yet happening to you, this is happening in the world. And it feels like she was just saying, I want you to understand. Can everyone understand? And what do you both wish more people understood about this moment in the fight for trans rights?
So I think there's a lot that I wish people understood. I think there's a real there's a real internalization of a very reductive idea of what's going on in the context of trans rights right now, as if it's a debate over, you know, the level of evidence supporting our healthcare, or if it's a debate over our, you know, some people competitively harmed in the context of sports. These very sort of reductive but strategically reductive debates about us that aren't really grappling at what's actually going on here. And something I wish that people understood is that the ways in which trans bodies are being subject to increasing systems of control from the government, the media, from cultural discourse, it is actually part of a much larger strategy that is connected to ways in which, you know, we might imagine the government is going to be increasingly organized. Like this idea of monitoring the contours of people's bodies so that their reproductive labor is controlled in a different way, so that their organizing is controlled in a different way. And you can see this directly happening in states like Texas, where you have the Texas state government doing things like, you know, criminalizing parents for supporting their trans kids, criminalizing people for supporting people's access to abortion, criminalizing people for being part of organizations that are giving people information about how to care for their bodies. And so this is all part of a structural apparatus around a theory of governance that is increasingly taking hold at the state level. And I do think at the moment of this election is something that could, in a much more extreme and direct fashion, take hold at the federal level in ways we have not seen before.
The thing I like to kind of tell people is, like, if you look at the Christian nationalist movement and where they're spending money, I live in Pennsylvania and have been watching TV, and the ads coming out. I mean, it's like you would think like trans people are ruining society and that is the number one threat. Which is ironic because, I think at the end of the day, like people's transness is kind of not a big deal. It's like pretty like, okay, whatever. But to see where they're spending money. So in 2020 alone, the Christian nationalist movement spent over $300 million researching anti-trans rhetoric and legislation. So it's clearly a priority for them. And I think it's time, as like a progressive movement, that we start prioritizing it to the same level.
When you
And
did this progressive movement, what is that? Who are we including?
yeah, exactly. Like who, I think that's the big question. Who?
Yeah.
Like as a left movement, wherever you're going to fall on that sort of scale of
Spectrum, yeah.
disaster, I guess. Um, how do we start to prioritize that? Because, if you poll Americans, most people will say like they know someone who's trans, they support sort of trans rights, but you then ask them like, could you have a kitchen table conversation with your aunt, your uncle, your cousin on the importance of trans people just existing or like playing in sports or going to the bathroom? People just they blank. They're like, yeah, I couldn't tell you how we're supposed to have that conversation. So we're losing at the narrative. And how do we start to shift that to be more embedded in sort of everyday conversations?
Mm.
TV and film is doing a pretty decent job at this point,
Mm-hmm.
compared to where we were even 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But they're funded and we're not in that way.
Yeah. that's key. And I think that there's also a piece where people don't think it's their work, right? Like this is always one of the pieces of this is why I keep thinking about solidarity, like what solidarity actually looks like in practice. And it's like, oh, you don't have to be a trans person, you don't have to be in direct relationship to a trans person for it to be your work to protect the bodily autonomy of your people, of humans, of this community. And I know for some people they're really moved by the idea of like if it's allowable for trans people, it's allowable for anyone, right? And that moves some people. But I think even more than that, it's just like these trans people exist. I'm just like trans people exist. And I do think I love that you said that like they might know someone who's trans now, which I do think helps, but I don't think that that necessarily prepares people to be in solidarity, right?
Totally.
So I really
Yeah.
appreciate that piece around it's like, oh yeah, like even when there's no trans people in sight, you still have a responsibility to sit at that kitchen table or to be able to make those interventions. Chase, is there anything that you want people to understand about what is coming up before the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that I too want to understand because I think we also have to keep in mind that, as we have a system where we have
Yeah.
nine
Yeah.
people who control so much and
Yes.
the stakes of that. And I think as someone who has, with a lot of self-reflection and complicated feelings, devoted my life to interfacing with this legal
Yes.
system with a lot of critiques of it, I do want to just hold like just taking a step back, how ridiculous this is. Like nine human beings who have their own biases and idiosyncrasies and influences in their lives ultimately determine the contours of so much of the structures of our government. And they are doing so relying on notions of an original understanding of a document that was written and ratified in 1789. Like think about how absurd that is for everyone who's living today. And that is the
Yeah.
reality of what we're up against. And so now we're in a situation where the nature of anti-trans lawmaking through state legislatures and through courts had become so dire that we had to go to the Supreme Court to try to stop some of it. But that's a bleak situation to be in when you're asking this Supreme Court to make things
Yeah.
better, because we know that's not really what they're doing in general. And so that's how bad things are. And at the end of the day, the sort of fundamental two questions before the court are, can the government discriminate against trans people with impunity? Is this going to be like, can governments continue to be targeting trans people like this with no recourse through our separation of powers structure, as absurd and limited as it is? And then the second question is, how far is the door going to be expanded from Dobbs into further incursions into people's bodily autonomy? Because the state of Tennessee and all the other states that are criminalizing our healthcare are saying, look, overturning Roe was just the beginning. It opened a door for us to say, and we will, that we have broader authority to ban medical care when it relates to sex in general. And that affects all of us. And that is what is at the court. And we're
Yeah.
waiting to find out when these oral arguments are going to be, probably sometime in December, but that's soon. We're talking,
That's really soon. Yeah.
yeah, like less than 2 months. We need to be organizing and speaking. And Shelby texted me last night and was like, "Oh my God, what are we doing?" Because
Yeah.
like we have a lot to do, but I think there's a good reason why people don't know about this. And also,
Yeah.
this is the first time a trans only case is going to be up there without an LGB sexual orientation case in this iteration. And we don't have
Mm.
people showing up for us in the same way.
Mhm.
Okay.
I'm curious about this. There's always this numbers question that plays out to me where it's like, oh, the majority of the country doesn't want this. There's just these small number of extremists who want this, but they're wreaking havoc everywhere and they're pulling this thing off. And I would love a little bit more insight on that, right? That it's like, especially thinking about it as like, what can some, like, what do I do? Right.
Mhm.
As I'm like, is it to educate people? Like there's a Supreme Court case happening about trans rights. And that's the thing I need to do because there's a ton of people who just need to know, like, it's actually important that we show up and what is showing up like to support a Supreme Court case look like? And is it also in this election cycle? Are there, I know that everyone keeps talking about the top of the ballot and being in that battle. I'm really focusing much more on the down ballot now and being like, this moment, this kind of the struggle that y'all are talking about is one that the further down the ballot you go, in some ways, the more we get to the people who are actually making these calls day to day, right? So that's a little bit confusing of a question, but maybe I'll try to pull it back out. One is this a case of like we just need to mobilize the majority of people who actually do want trans folks to have rights, and that mobilizing in December will be very difficult given the timing, which they do on purpose, of course, but that's what we need to do? Or is part of it we need to mobilize how people vote down ballot right now, or a little both and?
Yeah, I mean, both and. I mean, I'm sure. So I'll say about the Supreme Court, and then Shelby, I'm sure, has thoughts to say about that, stuff to say about that, and the down ballot, which is hugely important. I mean, like I live in New York City, and my child's school board is Moms for Liberty people. Like we're talking all across the country. Like these are the people who are controlling the access to information that our children have, and all sorts of other things in our lives. But as for the Supreme Court, yes, I mean, we need people to know, and we need people to know for sort of two really significant reasons. One is, yes, these are 9 people who decide based on all the things they decide based on, but one of the central things they decide based on is what they see the country, sort of doing and saying. And one of the reasons it's so easy to trample on the rights of trans people is because people like the 9 justices of the Supreme Court or the judges in different federal courts think that trans people are not cared about. And of course they think that because it's not just the extremists who are articulating these messages. It's the New York Times, it's publications that are seen as center or center left that are also articulating these narratives. So if we don't show these justices that this is actually a movement that the country is mobilizing around, that there will be upheaval and chaos on behalf of our communities if they rule against us, then we have a way less we already have an uphill battle. It's even more uphill if we don't have that. So we need you. We need people showing up because that's part of how we convince the justices. It's not just through our legal arguments.
Well, I think, a lot of people are like waking up to Project 2025, like it's like somehow new and it's never been here. And to me, it's like the publication of the document is like the final sort of bow on this like very extreme agenda, which has been building for decades.
Yeah.
But I think like if we as a movement of, LGBT groups, of abortion groups, of racial justice groups, I mean, the list is endless, could use that as almost our roadmap to think about how do we start to really dig into intersectional movements as a broader frame. I think it better aligns us to meet this moment. And, the ways that they got the Dobbs decision to go into effect was the second that Roe versus Wade was implemented, they started organizing. It took them 50 years and they did it.
Right.
So we've been organizing for 50 years, but we're organizing in these little silos. And it's like how to, we think about more of this like interconnected, whether it's super local to national sort of agendas, we can do that. And, for us, as we've sort of seen trans rights stripped away, particularly around youth healthcare, we've started working very closely with the abortion and repro folks. That's like, hey, like, can you all help us? Like, give us your lessons learned, invite us to your conversations. And it's been one of the most, honestly, like, just invigorating sort of period of time because you see how folks have met the moment time and time again, and they're figuring it out. Whether that's community-based solutions or whether that's getting on your school boards or whether that's, running for city council in your local district, people are winning in those ways. And we can't overlook that, I think.
I think that's important. And this actually flows beautifully into the next question, which is about right action. And, I've been thinking about this so much. And Chase, I saw you make a post that was just like, I work with this system. Like I am trying to reform the system because that feels like the most impactful thing I can do in this moment with the resources and the gifts that I have and the analysis I have. One part of what I keep seeing is that there's always this split, right? Where people are like, we got to just burn it all down. We just got to divest, we got to get out of it. And I never hear that. And here's how we're going to protect all the people who will be really impacted by that. And which isn't to say that they're not thinking about that, but you don't hear it, right? When those calls come. And when I hear you speak, I'm like, you're like, I agree on all those things, and I'm trying to keep my people alive and create space for us um, to be a part of the conversation, be part of shaping our own safety, be part of shaping our own access. And but I really appreciated you stepping out sort of with your chest and being like, look, like with respect to everyone else, this is what makes the most sense for me and my community in terms of how we need to move in this moment. And I keep trying to, part of why I've been having these conversations is because I'm trying to make room to see the united front that goes all the way from folks who are doing reform work all the way to folks who are doing revolutionary work, that there is alignment in wanting to be alive, alignment in wanting bodily autonomy, alignment in wanting an end to genocide, alignment in wanting to say no to fascism, that there's actually a lot of alignment across the board. There's differences in strategies for how we do that. And we actually get further. Historically, we get further when we recognize that those strategies are all playing a part in the same work, right? So I look at the civil rights movement, I look at women's rights movement, I look at these movements, and I'm like, you always need the folks who are revolutionaries, you always need the folks who are taking action, you always need the folks who are willing to go in and have the capacity to go talk to the Supreme Court. And we are on what feels like a new territory, right? We feel like it feels like a new level of recognizing the failure of the American systems. It feels like a new level of recognizing the implication of, like, I feel like more people understand what the US is actually doing in the world and what it's doing here. There's so much more clarity, but then there's more confusion of like, so what do we do? So all of that to say, what do you both see as right action in this moment? And, you know, what does it mean if people are going to mobilize behind y'all? What does that actually look like in practice? How much work needs to happen at our kitchen tables? How much work needs to happen in the streets? How much work needs to happen in media? How much, like, where do you want to ask people to show up for you?
I mean, I think it's like a both and. I've done policy work for years and I've always said it's harm reduction. I think I'll give you a couple live examples. So, the goal for TLC is abolition broadly for all communities, like let's end the carceral state. But we spent the last 7 years litigating in the state of Colorado, representing a class of trans women who were detained and incarcerated in the Colorado prison system.
Okay.
And, that's complicated. Because if the goal is to end the carceral state, then why are we trying to change the conditions? But we did it because people were writing us letter after letter saying, I can't access healthcare. I'm being discriminated against by the people who are like overseeing my quote unquote care. And I'm not safe. So we won permanent healthcare changes so everyone can access healthcare that's a trans woman that's detained in the Colorado prison system. And in addition to that, we got a housing unit that they requested. And lastly, we got $2.15 million in damages for a class of plaintiffs. And so, like, yeah, do I think that people shouldn't be in prison? 110%. But do I think that while they are experiencing that, we need to make it as safe as humanly possible? Absolutely. And to see that that gave them, I think, a sense of almost determination. That's like, hey, my life is valuable and people are advocating, like that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'll say the thing around Palestine. TLC spoke very openly, calling for a free Palestine and a broader anti-colonial sort of framework early on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And do I think that that means that everyone in our LGBT land or the broader land is going to get behind that? No. But what I do think is that can it spark at least a conversation to understand the ways that colonialism and genocide has historically impacted, as a Native person, certainly my own communities, but as trans people, like genocide in a broader framework. But we have to understand that the freedom of Palestinians and the genocide that they're experiencing is directly linked to how we're going to experiencing this country. And there's not a perfect solution. Lawmakers are not going to fix our problems because they're going to sort of make concessions to get elected, all of these things. But we can hold them accountable and make that an issue. I mean, shout out to Michigan in terms of what they've done for making this a presidential election cycle that people are watching and could go either direction because of people power. So I think to me, it's always a both and policy, it's not going to liberate us. It's just not. Like, I hate to say that to those that believe that, but I've always believed that even in doing policy advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so, I came of age working in New York, sort of as a young lawyer in prison abolition organizations, which is in and of itself, antithetical to a prison abolition organization. And that, I remember in 2008, I think, going to the Critical Resistance 10 when people had, just sort of having these conversations, sitting, talking. I've been in these spaces for 20 years, really thinking about these questions. Like as I worked at the Sylvia Rivera Law Project with my first job out of law school, and a lot of the question was, well, what is the role of our legal work, vis-a-vis our, liberatory set of goals? And at the end of the day, the people who are coming into our doors every day were like, we're dying. If you don't go to court for us, nobody will. And that has informed my political practice. That has informed my sense that, as someone who has been overly formally educated and has found just the slightest bit of ways to, walk into the Supreme Court, to go into depositions, to be the only trans person in these spaces through, miserable as it is, that I'm holding, the Lorena Borjas who walked in the door and changed my life every single day at Sylvia Rivera Law Project. Like, these are, it's holding all those things. Do I think that my work is liberatory? No. Do I think it's radical? No. Do I think it's revolutionary? Definitely not. Do I think that it might serve a purpose in keeping more people alive in the short and medium term? I do. And that's really what I've grappled with. And I remember, Adrian, we had a conversation years ago at a meeting that you were facilitating about this same question, like, where are we all sitting in these spaces? And it is increasingly hard when, the reality of, and I actually am someone who I have never believed in the government. I don't believe in a reform project where I'm asking of the government. I'm just fighting against them. I'm not someone who is willing to go say, pass this law to protect me. That's not my version of this. My version is, I will sue you when you encroach in a way. And that has caused a lot of tension with me in my workplaces, because I don't want the government organizing my life. I want it leaving us alone. And so I see my work as very much a work of batting away. And so in this moment of this election, and also, as a Jewish person whose very first work that I ever did in as 25 years ago was around organizing against the occupation. These are part of my most longstanding political projects, and I don't believe in the US government at all. And with that, I am holding this sense that I do also want to be able to stop the Ken Paxton-like surveillance, the denial of housing, food, and care for my communities. And I believe there is a role to play and choosing your enemy in that fight.
I really appreciate this. I keep thinking of how to think in multitudes, and how to think it as collective, and like how to think larger than each of us, larger than ourselves. And one of the pieces that comes up over and over again is none of the people that I roll with, none of the people I talk to on a regular basis think that the US project is succeeding or working or functional or any of those things, and are not invested in it. But there is so much that is like, but this is where we live. And so then there's responsibility that comes with that, both to stay alive and to not let the story of the US project be that white supremacist, capitalist, colonialist, anti-trans, anti-homophobe, like that wins, and that just gets to go unchecked and unfettered and destroy the world. That there's something about like being inside the beast and saying, we're putting brakes on it. We're figuring out how to stop it from within. So there's part of that, but there's also something to me about holding the vision of that future. So there's a future in which trans people no longer have to be protected in this way because they're no longer in danger in this way. There's a future in which trans people are recognized by everyone. It's just another way that the world got made, right? That the
Hmm.
world got made with all these beautiful variations and biodivergences. And that's actually the beauty of our species. And that's the beauty of it all. And I feel like there's a seed of that, right? It's like, how do we hold that seed, even though we're here in this rotting shell of a situation? And I hear that in both of you, and the work that you're talking about is like, yes, we hold these ideals, and then here's this person right here who's asking me to help them stay alive, so that, like, and I think that I always think it's revolutionary to save life. I actually do. I think it takes a lot to do that. It takes a lot to, especially in this world of so much distraction and so much passing on the blame or passing on the responsibility to others. So I want to say that explicitly to both of you. Thank you for your work, and that I've learned a lot from you. I've learned a lot about what it means to even be myself from the struggles, right? That I'm like, oh, right, like someone had to fight for my right to exist on, so like every aspect of my identity has had to be fought for. And this is the next fight, like, right? All right. So I hear you talking about mobilize. I hear you talking about standing behind you. I have a real sense of like, when the arguments are happening in the Supreme Court, like, is it like masses of people need to be outside the Supreme Court? Or like, what does it look like to show up in solidarity with a court case like this?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll say for me that like sort of being like I know again, like here I am as a federal court litigator. It's like really could not have imagined this for myself. This was not my dream.
Yeah.
And it was born of all of those. I mean, people have known me a long time are like, whoo, things went a direction, and I think it
Mm-hmm.
was just out of those like you're sort of building and learning. And I will say I came out of the Supreme Court in 2019 after we had the arguments October 8th, so almost exactly 5 years ago, on representing Amy Stevens, who was fired from her job for being trans. These are very simple things we're trying to fight for, all the way up to the Supreme Court. Like the employer was literally like, "We're firing you because you're trans." That was the question. And we come outside, and Amy actually died before we got the decision, which just in and of itself tells you so much about, the ways in which this type of discrimination is killing people. We had three plaintiffs and two of them died before we got the decision in June of 2020. And so you come out of the Supreme Court and Amy's there and we all were inside, and there's just hundreds of people outside just being beautiful. And going back to this, it is itself the testament to our longevity and all the ways we've made the world beautiful. So the more people who are out there, it is physically transformative for the people. Like we love you, Amy, is what they were chanting. And that was one of the last experiences of her life. I mean, how important is that? Like she fought to, she was a funeral director in Michigan who had to fight all the way to the Supreme Court, and she had that dignified moment. And I think that's what it's about on some level, is just
Yeah.
being there and holding that space. And also for me, I'll say like it's really hard to try to navigate these, for me and Shelby, we've been in this a long time as trans people, among cis people arguing for trans people, and to just be able to have our community outside is really meaningful. And
Yes.
that does make a difference for the justices. So it just, I do think when we get that date, which could come as soon as today, like we're gonna put it out there, and whoever can come to DC in December. No, it's not a great vibe, but like that will be really, really, really powerful. But if you can't be there in person, like also
Yeah.
sharing. Shelby, what do you think?
Yeah.
I mean, can I just take like a fangirl moment for you, Chase? Because we've known each other a long
Yes.
time. Like before we were anything, we were just confused, broke kids in New York. And you're going to argue in front of the Supreme Court. And I know like representation doesn't matter in some ways, but it's like historic. You know what I mean? And like, regardless of the outcome, like we're defending our rights in ways that like you were a trans person litigating a case on the future of trans rights. And that is, I don't know, it's pretty cool. I have to say, I knew you before you were like this, but also like
Strangio.
you were always that. Do you know what I mean? Like that's the
Yeah.
thing. Like just like fuck it all. Like we have literally nothing to lose but everything. So let's just give it our best shot.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
join you in that fangirl moment just to say I also feel that I mean I feel that way too, Chase, that I feel like as our paths have crossed, I've just been like, oh, you're like taking it to the door. Like you're like, we're not, I'm gonna, yes, we'll go for the biggest possible thing, you know? And it's just been monumental to watch you climb and that it feels like you're climbing with a real sense of accountability, right? To like the things you actually believe, the things you actually want to see happen in the world, the people you're actually fighting on behalf of. Flowers.
Well, thank you both. And I'll say, like, look, I became a lawyer with Shelby, with Tourmaline, with Chris Hayashi, with Stephanie Rivera, with Lorena Borjas. And then also that I don't have a thought that is not informed by those experiences that are, and I think and I'll say, like, I also am like greatly informed by the fact that like Polly Murray is probably the single most influential thinker around civil rights litigation, and Polly is a Black non-binary legend who is not known, of course, but like that's who carries me into the courtroom, into a deposition, into the sense that yes, you walk into the Supreme Court room and it is like frozen in time of a bygone and just even more destructive era, but we are entering it and breaking it open. And for Polly and for Lorena, I think that is what it's always about for me, and that is also sort of why we keep fighting to continue to, like, some of us, until we decide maybe it's wrong, and maybe it's the wrong call at this moment, like keep having our place in these spaces, as precarious as they are, to try to honor that work and honor the request from our people to keep them as alive as we can, and not just the like being, breathing, living, but also like the continued possibility to dream and organize.
Yeah, I deeply believe this that there is, I think of it as a holiness, but there is something about when we come together that is its own victory every time. That's like we are gathering unashamed, unafraid to be ourselves. We are coming together. That's like whether we win or lose, whatever the official state thinks of as victory, our victory is in existing together and growing the us, right? Growing how many people think of themselves as part of a movement that is connected to trans life, is connected to Palestinian life, is connected to Black life, is connected to queer life. Like we're growing this thing that is, I can feel it in us all the time. I'm like, oh, this is part of why I'm like, we have to protect. I believe in harm reduction also. We have to protect ourselves, but also at some point, these systems will collapse because they are top heavy. It is inevitable. They are poorly structured, poorly cared for. And there's a collapse that's built in that's already happening. And I'm like, all that practice of togetherness, of coming together to stand with each other and understanding each other will be of deep use. Right now, I just got to speak to someone from who's based in Asheville yesterday. And I was like, all the togetherness that they had in their systems is showing up now in the form of mutual aid and hiking up mountains to bring each other oxygen and all these things. Like it's all connected, right? That like coming together in this way is it creates a sense of community that can center trans life that is absolutely necessary right now. And then we get used to being able to do that. We know that we can do that. I believe that. I feel like both of you are so driven by your beliefs. So my final question for you is, how are you protecting your beliefs during this time?
So I do want to say, like, I really appreciate what you said about, the victory, the transformation is us in us coming together, as each other, with each other, holding space for each other, wrestling with hard questions with each other. And Adrian, like, that meeting I had with you, I don't know when that was that 12 years ago? Probably.
Yeah, it was 2014 or
Yeah, so it was a decade ago, and I think having shared space with you and listening to you, your guidance, other people like Jairus and Miriam Kaba, who Jairus Dixon and Miriam Kaba have, like, it to me, that's what it's the space I've shared with people who have helped me sit in mess. Because I believe so deeply in mess. The idea that there's certainty is so off-putting to me, because it just, we are like, I'm a messy person. And so that keeps me in my path forward. I feel motivated and inspired and honestly like ready every day. And it's those experiences, it's the experiences I've had with, I mean, Shelby and I have been working together for 15 years, and that these relationships are what keep me going. People who knew me when I was like trying to figure out where to like get my first tattoo, who gave me my first testosterone shot in like the house of homos where I lived in Jamaica Plain, Boston. Like these, I know all these people still because we keep each other alive, which is the other thing, is that whatever the government takes from us, I know exactly where to find the answer within my community of how to get it and give it to the people who need it.
I would say similarly, I try for me to just pull back when I need to and want to. And for me, as like a triple Scorpio, I need a routine all of the time.
Oh, honey.
Yeah, exactly. I need a routine. So I'm into my working
Scorpion.
out, but like my favorite thing to do right now is two of my best friends from college, a queer couple. They have a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and I FaceTime with the 6-year-old and do emojis for like 3 hours and just like do kid shit. Go to places that I love. Like I think for me, like land is just really important, and how we tend to land, but how we inhabit land and how we think about that. Going to places that just make you feel whole. Those simple acts. I had the pleasure recently of being in like a couple day long space with Norma Wong, and I was just like, my mind was like blown away. I was just like,
Yeah.
you were you're everything that I needed. And like, it felt like instinctual in this way that like, I don't experience that all the time, but I was like, we are clearly connected in this way that I will feel for many months. And I carry that with me and just generations of care.
I love that. Norma, I feel like Norma is one of those people who's like rooted all the way down to the center of the earth. I'm really grateful you said the thing about kids. I just spent the weekend with one of my nibblings who is being raised by people who are allowing them to be exactly who they are. And they're 3 years old right now. And it's all like, it's just so clear to me how I'm like, this person is this fluid being who in my lifetime, I have watched it become possible for this person to exist because of the work that y'all are doing and also because of the being that you are being, right? Just like being yourselves in the world carves out space for this precious nibbling of mine to be themselves in the world. And I know that no matter what any state says, that's happening and that's real. And I'm so grateful to both of you for the work that you're doing. Thank you so much. I'm also so grateful for yeah, what's to come. Like I can feel victory on the horizon. And it may be the form of healing, which is my favorite kind of victory. It may be the form of this case moving through. But thank you for inviting us to show up and be in solidarity. And thank you. I really,
Thank
really
you.
Thank
appreciate y'all
you.
both. Yeah. Be well, be safe.
Bye.
Bye.
Shake these bones, oh, I gotta 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 shake these bones.